good morning, good evening, welcome back, or if you've just discovered us, great to have you along. Matthew Grant here. Now, we've been doing these podcasts for over 7 years, and to let you into a little secret, one of the reasons for still doing them is we're learning so much from our guests every week, and I hope you two are, by the way. Well, this week is no exception. Guillaume Bonnissent is co-founder and CEO of Quotech, and like many successful founders, Guillaume is in the category of what I call an accidental entrepreneur. Those are the people who hadn't necessarily planned to shift their career to building a business themselves, but as Guillaume says, he couldn't find what they're looking for to fix some problems in his day job, so decided to build it themselves. Literally, build it in his case. Not many people I know, particularly underwriters, who are writing computer code to define their first product release. Well, if you're interested in what else we're up to at Instech and how we can help you, you can find all of what you need at www.instech.co. Again, really thrilled to have this chance to talk to you. I always really enjoyed talking to people that were doing a job, got frustrated because they couldn't find the tools they needed, went off and built a business. And actually, not only that, you actually wrote the first part of the product yourself. So we're going to learn a little bit more about how an underwriter also became a software programmer. Pretty unique, I suspect. But welcome. You're in France just now, I think, aren't you?
Yes, I am in northern France, where the sun is shining for once.
And I'm sure you're enjoying some high quality food as well. So you're providing technology for commercial underwriters and brokers. Your solutions cover data ingestion, extraction, pricing, distribution, policy administration, and claims, which is an awful lot to have done by a company that you founded back in January 2020. As I touched on there, you were actually working as Chief Underwriting Officer for a London MGA and also previously been with Hiscox. And also I noticed you're a bit of a podcast guest regular as well. So I'm sure I'm going to learn some tips from you about great podcasting. But have I missed anything critical in that before we kick off?
Yeah, experienced podcast guest is a bit of a stretch, but yes, the rest is absolutely correct.
Great. Well, I'm really intrigued, first of all, just to understand, we also hinted at it there in terms of the challenges you had, but when underwriters do pretty well, always good job opportunities. What was it that took you out of one career and decided to go and start up your own business and take the risks of doing that?
The answer is very simple. I couldn't find what I was looking for, and I thought I could do it myself. So I saw a business opportunity. And I think a lot of businesses are born out the frustration of the founders because they couldn't find what they wanted, or they just thought of something that they really needed and therefore other people would need.
What was really interesting to me was not only did you get frustrated by not having the product, you actually then went and wrote the product yourself. And I think you actually had your first customer using it. That is pretty unusual for somebody coming from one background to sort of write a product. Had you already learned coding when you did that, or did you sort of learn that on the fly as well?
When you go to French business school, you learn how to code. So I always had that in my back pocket, but they were very old codes. And then about 15 years ago, everyone was talking about artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is going to replace underwriters. So as an underwriter, I started getting worried and saying, okay, if that's going to replace us in 20 years, I'm still planning on working in 20 years, so I better learn more about it. There were a lot of languages used in data science that were actually quite easy to learn, like R and Python. So I started having some fun learning them, and then realized that actually you could build a prototype, you could build a minimum viable product just by playing around, and actually have quite a lot of fun with that. What I quite enjoy was the fact that as an underwriter, what you do is very intangible, apart from when you've got claims, whereas it was actually after 20 years underwriting career to build something that is tangible was surprisingly satisfying.
Yeah, there's a real pleasure, isn't there, whether it's digital or more analog, of creating something for real. Although given my own experiences of trying to refresh my coding, I've got great admiration for you. We might come back and talk a bit more about that, because I think there's a whole separate area that's actually really fascinating for people that are actually looking at starting up their own business and actually do what you did, which is you create something that you could show somebody else and scale from that. But let's just get back to this problem. What are you building today that is helping insurers and brokers and MGAs solve this sort of major problem? What are they struggling with that you're helping them fix?
I think is every underwriter in the market will tell you, or most of them will tell you, they don't have the right tools for their jobs. And I think that's where you've got a plethora of Excel spreadsheets around the market because you want to record submissions, you want to record quotes, but actually your company only gives you a traditional policy platform that only allows you to record the bare minimum. It's the same for the underwriting directors or CEO or divisional head who want to check what the underwriters are doing and have a bit more stats. So that's what we started doing. It's recording everything from the submission, bringing in third-party data that enrich the data that you receive from policyholder. And then once you start recording all this, you're really at the beginning of the journey. And that is why the company is called Quotech, because I wanted to start something from submission. Now, submission tech didn't sound as good as Quotech, so we went one step after the submission and moved on to the quote. But once you've recorded the submission, that's where you can start everything else. You've got your source of truth, and you can start off the workflow that allow you to issue a quote, issue the policy documents, everything to do with finance, claims, etc. The issue we're answering is providing one system for underwriters that give them that one source of truth for everything they do.
I really like the way also you tie it into the use of spreadsheets and data, because I mean, there's a reason spreadsheets still exist, and to some extent they do fulfill a role, but there's a limitation really how much a company should depend on them. And then also you're accessing into all the other data that's out there that people sometimes get, but don't always get easily. And I think you're helping pull it all in together. But there are lots of big companies out there offering very expensive systems to do this. I mean, why are there gaps? Why does the industry need Quotech and doesn't find this from various established providers who are still investing and growing their products?
Absolutely. And it's because we went at it in a very different way. I didn't start with a blank piece of paper, but I was thinking like, I've done in my career, in my underwriting career, a lot of different lines of business. So I was able to see the commonalities between them, but also the differences. And I think the issue with a lot of very large companies' product is they try to make the one platform work for every line, but without adapting to the needs of all the different lines. So you've got the kind of commonality becomes, it reduces the ability of the platform to be able to serve all these different lines. We're going at it differently because we're targeting teams. For instance, where we've been very successful at the moment is targeting marine teams. Everyone will tell you if you do marine, you can do every other line. And that's because of the intricacies of marine, where you've got different currencies per vessel, you've got different interests, different credits that apply. But we've built a platform in a way that is very flexible. So we can do marine on one side, but we can also do property, general aviation, transportation, crisis management, etc. And this is really the difference between us and the larger companies, is that bespoke element where we can say, okay, you do marine, here we go, we've got a solution for marine. You do general aviation, we've got a solution for that, but you can still customize it to your needs. I always joke that when you meet underwriters, they will tell you that their line of business is always different to every other line of business. And the way they do it is very different from everyone else who does the same line of business. And part of it is slightly true, but then that's where the configuration and allows you to do that with our platform. And that's why these underwriters get quite frustrated by these large companies offering, because if you do marine, it's not the same thing as doing tourism. You know, you need different fields and there's different characteristics you want your platform to have.
Guillaume, I think you've got a book in you, because there's a very well-known book called The Lean Startup, and it's all about you start with your minimum viable proposition, you do one thing, you do it really well. You've almost like turned that on his head, and you said, actually, no, start with a really hard problem. I mean, it strikes me like trying to learn Latin if you're going to learn language. Start with a really hard problem, which is marine. If you can figure that out, then everything else falls into place. But that's really hard, and you've got to get it right. But it seems like when you do get it right, as you said, you can now move into other lines of business.
You're absolutely spot on, Matthew. We did it quite different. We took on the big elephant first. But now, after 4.5 years, we can reap the benefits of that approach. I used to have long, blonde, curly hair before we started, and now I look like I'm about to retire.
You look very distinguished, by the way, so I wouldn't worry about that. Tell me a bit about teams then. You said you work with teams. That implies to me that you've got an underwriter, but you've also got assistant underwriters, underwriting assistants, actuaries. Is that the case, that different people are using Quotech?
Absolutely. We've targeted teams because you've got teams in small companies like an MGA, they can be 2 to 5 people, but you can also have teams within a larger organization where there's 5 people or 30, like some of the teams we're working with. And what's quite interesting as well with the way we've done the platform is because we wanted to cater for all of them, we've done two things that are quite different. We've adopted a modular approach, which means that we can say to some larger clients, if you already have a module to do accounting, you don't need our accounting module. Whereas for the smaller clients, they need all of our modules because we are their IT platform. The second thing I was very keen to do is not to have roles on the platform based on someone's job's title, as you see in some platform. Because when you're a two-man team, one of you is going to have to be in charge of sanctions. One of you is going to do the credit control. Whereas when you're a larger team, you do have an accounting team, you do have a compliance team. It's why I don't really like the expression underwriters workbench, because it would make you think that the platform is only for underwriters. Now, in my career, I've been an operation assistant, I've been an underwriting assistant, an assistant underwriter, an underwriter, a CEO, etc. And it's really aimed at all of those roles because it's everyone who has a touch point with a submission or a quote or a policy. We're all looking at the same data. So why have different platforms? And also why say this platform's only for underwriters? If you work in claim, you'll have this platform. If you're an actuary, you'll have this one. So that's the approach we've taken, which is again quite different from larger IT companies' approach.
Yeah, and please don't tell Robin Mertens that you want to rebrand or rename underwriting workbenches. It's taken about 2 years to get the rest of the world to see the value. But I completely understand what you're saying, and I agree exactly with the concept. I think your smallest team is 2 people. Do you track how many people would be in one of your larger client teams?
Yeah, 30. And the reason why we track it is because our pricing model is a per user per month license. Again, a lot of our competitors charge a percentage of gross written premium. I used to absolutely hate that as a client. So I was never going to introduce it.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into a pricing discussion. I mean, there is a merit, I think, for scaling. A very large company can afford more, but we're going to get off on a sidetrack, but I think it's quite relevant. I've always felt that when you price by users, people feel it's fair because different users have got different values. So you can go a whole separate conversation, but I can see why that makes sense. And also, I think there is a lot of value in tracking who's using something because then you know who your clients are. For a business like yours, they're turning up every day and they're working with the Quotech platform. I mean, you are part of their lives, I would think, once they become your clients, which is also a really important distinction versus somebody who's got a product that's maybe used once a month or something.
Absolutely. And it's actually going back to the tangible aspect. That's one of the things that is really fascinating. And sometimes you have to pinch yourself once you've started a business, is to think that people are using your platform every day. And they're even using the name Quotech. It was my mother-in-law actually who came up with the name. And so to think now that people are using the name, I find that quite fascinating and slightly weird.
Well, when it becomes a verb, maybe it is already, we're going to Quotech it, then you know you've really arrived that.
I haven't heard that yet, but maybe, yeah.
People talk about RMSing things when they want to run the catastrophe models, or probably AIR them when they're using the other ones. But yeah, you're kind of moving into the world of Hoovers and Biros and thermos flasks and things. That's your sort of next vision. Whatever you rebrand underwriting workbenches as will become known as a Quotech, even if it's not a Quotech. It can be your goal for, you can redefine the category.
If that ever happened, Matthew, I think it's fair to say I'll be on the beach enjoying life.
Well, you heard it here first. Aren't you in a bit of a race and competition with Excel? Because whilst on the one hand, Excel has been a bit clunky, it's getting better and better at doing graphs and reporting. I mean, now they're adding in generative AI capabilities. So how are you finding that? Are you also providing ways for people to look at the data and look at sort of management information coming out the back of Quotech?
Absolutely. You can have two approaches about Excel. You can say this is the worst thing that's happening to the financial services industry, or you can take the approach that actually, even though Excel was created for double booking accounting, it's a fantastic tool. And that's why I keep telling the team here at Quotech, I say, the reason why our clients love Excel is because it's super easy to use. And if you want to record the new data point, you select the column where you want it, you right click and you put insert. Now also you can do things like integrating it with ChatGPT and other AI tools. Doing a graph is super easy. So my view is always, okay, let's have a look at why people love Excel. What is it that they love about it? And make sure that our platform is nearly as easy to use, but we address all of the bad point of Excel, which is you can't manage an MGA on Excel. You can't collaborate on Excel very easily. But at the same time, we also need to integrate with Excel because sometimes it's actually easier to manipulate data in Excel. So download it from the platform or upload it onto the platform. And that's what we've done. I don't think Excel's here to disappear because it is a fantastic tool. You have to recognize, but it is a fantastic tool that is good for certain things, but not so good for others.
Two takeaways from that. One, where Excel starts to become dangerous is people start sharing files, or the company's too heavily dependent on an Excel macro or tool, and when something breaks, you don't know how to fix it, or you just never knew you had a problem with it. But also your point about why people do like it, and I think this is a great lesson for any product, is my experience of using Excel has been over the years, if I want to do something, I know Excel can do this. And I know there's probably a better way of doing it than I might think of straight away. But I mean, to design a product where and I think this is where it must be really helpful, your underwriting background. Someone looks at it and goes, I know Guillaume's an underwriter, therefore he's probably designed into his product something that I want to do as an underwriter. And you might not get there straight away, even though you'd make them pretty widespread, but you sort of move towards that position where someone inherently trusts the product because they know it's got the flexibility to do what they want. I don't know if you consciously think about that. You probably think about it subconsciously.
Absolutely. And it even goes as far as the user experience, right? So all developers who haven't been underwriters, they're not used to dealing with Excel. So the idea that you could have a long table where you scroll left and right, to them, they're like, oh, this is awful. Let's find a solution to do that. Every single one of our clients, when we try to get rid of these tables where you scroll left and right, say, the client is king, but the user is king in software. If the user likes it and that's the way they want to interact with your platform, you have to show them alternative. But if they prefer the original and their way of working, that's what you have to do. And to me, that was actually a fantastic lesson.
But you do have a challenge, don't you? So you've got, 12 clients now? You get to the point where you can't respond to the needs of every individual client or user because you can't create 12 different versions of the software. So how do you balance that? Client is king, but the king has to operate within an infrastructure that you can support. You can't have 12 kings or queens.
Absolutely. And I think that's where my underwriting background is really useful. I can see when there's an idea that comes from a client that would be very useful for all other clients, or if it's an idea that they have, but I'm like, actually, there is a better way of doing it, presenting it to them. And because I know that better way will actually work for everyone else. One of the most satisfying things I've seen in the evolution of Quotech is features that actually were ideas from clients. So we work with them and we explain what can be done and all that. And then they start using the platform, and that's where the ideas start flowing. So having features that come from either your clients or your employees is actually super satisfying because that's where you realize you've got a proper business. You're like, okay, I'm not Quotech. Yes, I founded it and I started designing the first bit, but actually it is standing on its own.
We're going to go through all the analogies we can think of today. You're kind of the conductor of an audience now. You're waving your baton around, but you're not playing the violin and the drums and all the rest of it. What I think is really exciting when that happens with the clients is you get your clients in the same room and they're building on each other. It does lead me to another question, actually, which is you sort of partly answered. So you wrote the initial code. You could use that to have your first product. And then you can use it a little bit to developers. But how do you transition? And this is again a lesson, I suppose, anybody building a business. You can't really be the CEO and build a product for very long. How did you do that after 2020 when you sort of realized you actually had a business here, but you had to bring in other people to code to do that?
Yeah, I had to look at what I wanted to do as well. And obviously coding is not what I want to do. I'm not a developer. It was fun when it was fun, but it's definitely not my role. And what I like was defining what the product is, working on new features, defining them, explaining them. So that transition from coding to employing developers who I wanted to make sure they had absolutely no insurance background, that they knew nothing about insurance so that they learn it from me. It may sound a bit flippant, but I just wanted them to be amazing at technology, come up with ideas that were used in other industries, but learn the insurance part from me and from our clients. So we did a lot also of lunch and learn meetings with where we had different clients explaining how they do it with their product, etc., which was really interesting and very well received. And then as the product evolved, then I realized that the way I was doing product, I'm not a product manager by any stretch of the imagination. So then we employed someone to do product. And this is how you need to evolve, I think, as a founder. You need to always know your capabilities, what you're good at, and also think of what you enjoy. I'm pretty sure now, like, if the company get very successful, my dream is not to be the CEO of a company that's got 100 people plus. It's probably at this stage that I'll go, okay, let's, for instance, recruit a proper CEO who's much more experienced than I am, and I can concentrate on what I like doing, which is thinking of new features, selling to clients, doing more of a client relationship. So I think it's when, as a CEO, I think you can't do everything. So you may as well make sure that you employ people who are better than you are at doing the things that you're not good at or that you don't enjoy doing.
I think that's so important, and I've seen a lot of companies where people have had this humility to recognize that. And then really in the early stage, you're not really chief executive officer, you're kind of chief everything officer. And then, these companies have been quite successful bringing in somebody who actually is a very strong operational CEO. And then, as you said, they go back to the things they're good at, the things they want to do, and they continue to stay fresh and enjoy it. And again, I just want to talk a bit about, we touched on this very briefly, but it's interesting you've built a product that is both serving insurers and brokers. Yes, they're in the same business, but they're actually essentially doing very different things. One, the underwriters are actually assessing risk and pricing. Brokers are responsible for the distribution and advising their clients. So how do you build a product that can deliver the needs of two different constituents?
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's another approach we took where I used to work. So my last role before I started Quotech was to work for a large MGA that was both delegating authority to MGAs and getting obviously authority delegated to them as an MGA. And that's when I realized that in the software industry, they couldn't give us a product because we're like, this is our MGA product. And we're like, well, we delegate. And so they say, okay, this is our insurance product. And so what I'm trying to say is there's some very blurred line between what brokers, MGAs, Lloyd's syndicate, and insurers do. And so if you can offer a modular approach where you've got different module, you're actually able to cater for everyone in the insurance distribution chain. And so, as you rightly said, brokers are more interested of the client facing part, but some MGAs are as well. Some MGAs or even some insurers deal directly with clients. But the commonalities is they all have to record the submission. So the brokers have to record the submission that they're going to pass on to the underwriters. And what they record is very similar to what underwriters are also recording. What I've come to realize as well, because I've had many experience in insurance, but I've never been a broker. And so I never thought at the beginning that we would be selling to brokers. I thought our target audience is underwriter. But when I started talking to brokers, they were telling me, well, actually, we want to know what information the underwriters are looking at. We want to know, like, whatever data enrichment you do for the underwriters, we want to have access to that because, one, we want to present it back to our clients to show them what the underwriters are going to look at, but also to demonstrate that we've got good knowledge about the product. And we want also to present it to the underwriters to differentiate ourselves from the other brokers who wouldn't have thought of that. If this information they're accessing is actually helping our client get a better price, then it's great. If it's actually not going to help them get a better price, then we need to be aware of it so that we can find a counter argument when we speak to the underwriters. And that was, to me fascinating. And that is how we came up with ways for having modules for brokers as well. So to record submissions, but also to enrich the data, and so that they can prepare presentation for their clients, but also presentation to the underwriters as well when they submit risk.
Yeah, and you tapped into that really powerful business model of the network effect. When people in any kind of exchange of information, both parties need to have the ability to understand the information. You've created a very powerful business model, because the more you sell into one group, then the more the others need to also know what's going on. And you've got a couple of large, well-known brokers already, Ardonna, Howden, and of course, Convex is interesting. They're both an underwriting client and they're one of their early investors. It'd be great to the extent you can share it to sort of learn a little bit more about where your investors came from and what might be out there in the future from an investment perspective.
Luckily, we got Convex as an investor. They were very supportive. They're a great company to work with. They're very innovative. They've got a fantastic reputation in the market, and what they've achieved you could say they're a startup, but actually I wish we'd been as successful a startup as they've been. So we're not really in the same category as them. But what we've done is, for other investors, we went a lot to angels. And I was very keen to have angel investors who have either work in the insurance industry or used to work in the insurance industry or work on the periphery of the insurance industry. It's really, really good to work with these angel investors because they're very keen to help you open doors. And there is no secret. The higher up you go in an organization, the more likely you are to be successful at selling. And that is where having a network of angels who can open these doors and introduce you to the right people is fantastic. A bit like being a member of your organization as well. Instech is fantastic because you can connect people. That's the beauty of targeting the insurance market, especially in London. Everyone's within 1 square mile, more or less, and everyone knows everyone.
You do get a double benefit, absolutely. And a number of people who are investing as angels, they are very selective, and of course they're very informed. So the very fact you've got a roster of often well-known angels, it says a lot for the business. It's in so many ways, and it's also encouraging to see people putting money back into the business. And then you mentioned earlier about access to third-party data. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and who you're working with?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something I've always been interested in, finding these new sources of data, and not necessarily sources of data that targeted at insurance. Actually, I find it much more interesting when it's sources of data that were not built for insurance, but actually have application in insurance. And in all my roles, I've always been keen to look for them. And actually, part of the idea with Quotech was the fact that in my previous role at the large MGA, we had found some third-party sources of data to enrich the application form that we received from brokers. But because we didn't have the systems to bring in that data via API into a platform, we were actually making the underwriting process longer than it used to be, which was very counterintuitive when you're trying to improve things. So the idea of Quotech was to build something where you record everything, but also you can bring in the third-party data. And if it's a third-party source of data that is not targeted at insurance, you let the platform do the analysis to take that bit that is relevant to insurance. But also you record everything. You record that snapshot so that if in 3 years there's a data point that you haven't used, you can do some regression analysis and see, actually, we recorded that data point, we've never used it, but now we've done regression analysis because we've got the claims figures and it's very relevant. So then you can start using it. We found a source of data called Disaster Aware Enterprise. The federal government back in the 90s gave money to the University of Hawaii to start the Pacific Disaster Center. It was following a hurricane that destroyed a Hawaiian island, and they realized that all the warning signs had been there. So they gave money to the University of Hawaii and said, you need to recruit PhDs and scientists from all across the country to start monitoring every disaster that's happening in Hawaii. Imagine if you were an American scientist and someone comes to you and say, would you like to move to Maui? You'll have access to military graded data that no private company can get access to. And your reports will go to the White House, all the federal agency. So as you can imagine, they've been so successful that now they monitor all events across the world, 37 payrolls. And then 6 years ago, they started selling to private companies like Facebook, Citrix, Mattel, etc. And when I came across them, they'd never sold to insurance. So I was like, okay, can I be your reseller for the insurance industry? So now we resell that data to a few insurers and some brokers, but we've also integrated it to our exposure management module, which means that we can give an early warning system to our clients and say, there's been a wildfire in California that will have impacted 3 of your properties. So you combine that with data like companies like TensorFlight as well, where you do the satellite imagery. And there's so many different sources of data that you can then bring in. And it's really interesting because these are data that you can bring in either at the underwriting stage or at the portfolio management stage, or sometimes both. And in a way, Quotech is nearly the medium to be able to do that. If I was describing Quotech sometimes as a very simplistic way, I would say it's the missing link between what underwriters are currently doing and the really cool technology that people are building in all these startups and all these third-party data.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, you're not just a missing link, you're validating that as well. We're big fans of companies coming from outside of insurance, coming into insurance. Just a couple of things before we wrap up. In terms of how people access the information, so if someone's using Quotech, how do they physically integrate that into their day-to-day workflow?
It's all on the cloud, as you can imagine. So you need a browser and the internet. It's all massively secure. I mean, we've got people in Latin America, Africa, Asia, North America, obviously Europe, accessing our platform every day.
24 hours a day, someone is actually using Quotech. There you go. That's the next sort of threshold. That's brilliant. Well, Guillaume, we've covered a lot there. Is there anything we haven't spoken about that we should be talking about?
It's going back to the fact that we target teams. What we see more and more, especially from large organizations, is they've realized that one solution doesn't fit all. And they're looking at teams that have different requirements. And because of the use of data lakes and all these different ways of producing management information report, they're quite ready to let one team have a system that is different to the others and maybe more specific because they've got specific needs. And that is why you actually see a lot of insurtechs or technology company targeting specific lines of business. And that's only possible because companies have, or at least the successful companies in my mind, have realized that if you've got, say, 60 different lines of business, you can't satisfy everyone with one platform at the moment. It just doesn't exist. Therefore, it's much better to look at each requirement separately. And that also means that you've got much smaller project to handle. That is also why we've adopted the approach of targeting teams, is because I could already see that happening when I was on the other side of the fence. And that's a hypothesis that actually I think is materializing and happening more and more.
Does that, the fact you're approaching teams, means that your buyer or the person making the buying decision is more of the business user, the underwriter or somebody else, rather than the more traditional way of having to go through the sort of CTO, CIO?
That's exactly when we've been more successful, is when it's the underwriters or the underwriting team that make the decision. It's much more powerful if the user is happy and the user wants something. And you can see more and more the companies that are successful are the ones who let their user, within reason, and obviously the checks and balances and due diligence, but the companies that within reason ask for the user's opinion are much more successful. And it's also, it's a no-brainer, right? If your employees are happy and you give them the right tool, they're more likely to stay and be effective at their job.
So again, that's some really fascinating information in there. I'd love to keep talking, but I don't want to overuse the generosity of everyone who's listening to this. In the meantime, we'll put your link to your details in the episode notes. But for anyone who wants to get hold of you like right now, what's the best way to track you down?
So yeah, the best way is to either find me on LinkedIn or go to a website where you've got all of our contact details, or email me at guillaume@quotech.io.
Guillaume, I'm going to let you go. And again, thank you very much. And also thank you very much for your support as a member of Instech. You know, it's a small growing company. Every euro or dollar or pound you spend is important. So we really appreciate your support. And it's a pleasure working with you. And that was a really stimulating discussion. I just love the founder's story as well. So thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Matthew, for having me on the podcast and for your support at Instech. Really appreciate and couldn't recommend more to other insurtechs to become members.
Well, thank you. Well, back to your August in France, Guillaume.
Thank you.
Well, another fascinating founder story. Really love those. And we are very grateful to Guillaume and his team at Quotech for their support for Instech. Now, if you're curious about how we can help you learn more about what is happening at the sharp end of innovation and technology and insurance, maybe through becoming a corporate member, or you want help sharing your stories with the world, then please contact any of us, hello@instech.co. That's it. We're done.